pulse of him.
The first thing Jonah ever said to me was, "You staring because you're curious, or because you're an asshole?" Everyone in the common room froze, including me. I'd only been at Rosewood Assisted Living for 3 days, and already I'd learned the unspoken rule: don't look too long. Don't ask questions. Don't acknowledge the equipment, the sounds, the involuntary movements. Be polite. Be invisible. Jonah clearly didn't care about any of that. I started, then stopped, heat crawling up my neck. I wasn't staring. He snorted. Yeah. You were. A few people laughed awkwardly. Someone pretended to check their phone. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow my wheelchair whole. "I'm Calder," I said finally. "New guy." "I know," Jonah said. "You've been doing laps like you're casing the place. I'm figuring out the layout." "Sure you are." Despite myself, I smiled. Something about the way he looked at me, head tilted, eyes sharp but not unkind, felt different. Like he wasn't assessing what I couldn't do. Just me? I rolled closer, stopping beside his chair. "And you are?" "Jonah. Resident pain in the ass?" He paused. "You can sit if you want. I'm not contagious. I already am sitting." That got a real laugh. Loud. Unapologetic. Over the next week, we kept ending up in the same spaces. Breakfast. Physical therapy. The back patio where everyone pretended they weren't bored out of their minds. Jonah talked constantly, about movies, about how the food tasted like regret, about how this place treated adults like fragile glass figurines. "You ever notice," he said one afternoon, staring out at the courtyard, "how independence is something people only care about until you actually ask for it?" I knew exactly what he meant. I'd fought my parents for months to move here. They called it reckless. I called it breathing. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Every day." He glanced at me, expression softening just a fraction. "You don't talk much." "I listen." Dangerous habit. Still, he kept talking. And I kept listening. Somewhere between shared eye rolls and late-night conversations, something settled between us. Not friendship exactly. Something warmer. More alert. The first time he asked me for help, it wasn't dramatic. We were in the hallway outside his room. His keycard had slipped from his fingers and landed just out of reach. "I hate this part," he muttered. Without thinking, I nudged it closer with my footrest. He looked up at me, surprised. "Thanks," he said. Then, quieter, "Most people rush in. Grab. Fix. I figured you'd ask if you wanted that." His mouth twitched. "You're different." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. One night, weeks later, we sat on the patio after curfew, the air cool and still. He asked me why I really came here. "I wanted my own life," I said. "Even if it's messy." Jonah nodded slowly. "Yeah. Me too." We didn't touch. Didn't need to. The silence felt full instead of empty. As I rolled back to my room later, I realized something had shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to make me wonder what it would feel like to let someone see all of me, and not look away. Jonah started pushing boundaries on purpose. Not in big, dramatic ways. Little ones. He'd ask staff questions they didn't like answering. He'd insist on doing things slower, or differently, just to remind them he could. I watched it happen from the sidelines at first, half impressed, half terrified he'd get us both in trouble. "You're staring again," he said one morning in the dining hall, cereal untouched in front of him. "I'm admiring your commitment to chaos." He grinned. "You should try it sometime." I told myself I didn't need chaos. I'd spent my whole life carefully negotiating space, asking permission, making things easier for other people, swallowing irritation because it was simpler than explaining. Jonah didn't swallow anything. He spat it back out and dared the world to deal with it. The first time I followed his lead was during physical therapy. The therapist kept correcting my grip on the parallel bars, talking over me while I tried to explain what actually worked for my body. Jonah was waiting nearby, pretending not to listen. She said that hurts. He cut in suddenly. The therapist blinked. Excuse me? I said that hurts him. You're not the one standing there. My heart was pounding. I opened my mouth to soften it, to apologize, to smooth things over like I always did. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "Yeah. It does." The room went quiet. The therapist adjusted without another word. Afterward, Jonah wheeled up beside me, eyes bright. "See? Survived." I laughed, shaky but real. "You're a bad influence. Best kind." We started spending more time in my room after that. Not because we were hiding, because it was one of the few places that felt ours. We talked about everything: his childhood surgeries, my parents' fear masquerading as love, the way the future felt both too close and impossibly far. One night, he asked, "Do you ever think people confuse care with control?" "All the time," I said. He nodded. "I don't want a life where someone decides what's best for me without asking." Neither did I. Saying it out loud felt like lighting a match in a dark room. There were moments, quiet ones, where I noticed how close we sat. How his knee brushed my chair, how his voice softened when he said my name. It wasn't physical. Not yet. It was something gentler and more dangerous, being seen without being managed. When he finally left that night, the room felt different. Charged. Like I'd agreed to something without fully knowing the terms. Later, alone, I replayed the day in my head, not the confrontation, not the jokes, but the feeling of speaking up and not being corrected for it. Of someone standing beside me without trying to take over. It scared me. And it felt right. I lay there listening to the hum of the building, realizing that independence wasn't a destination. It was a practice. And for the first time, I wasn't practicing alone. The first time someone mistook Jonah for my caregiver, he laughed. The second time, he didn't. We were out in the city on one of our supervised, independent afternoons, which mostly meant a staff member trailing us from half a block away pretending not to watch. A woman at the cafe counter smiled at Jonah and said, "He's lucky to have such a devoted helper." Jonah went still. "I'm not his helper," he said calmly. "I'm his friend." The woman flushed, stammered an apology, and rushed off with our drinks. I stared at Jonah, my chest tight. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he said softer now. "If I don't say it, she keeps believing it. And then so do you." I didn't have an answer for that. Just a strange, swelling gratitude that sat heavy behind my ribs. That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard the quiet knock on my door. Jonah didn't wait for permission, he never did, but he hesitated this time, hovering in the doorway like he wasn't sure where he was allowed to stand. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah. Just loud thoughts." "Same," he said. "Mind company?" I shook my head, and he came in, positioning his chair beside my bed instead of across the room. Closer than usual. Not touching. A choice. We talked in low voices about nothing and everything. About the city lights outside the window. About how weird it felt to want things without knowing how to ask for them. At some point he said, "Can I tell you something without you trying to fix it?" I nodded. "I think I'm falling for you," he said, voice steady, hands gripping his wheels like anchors. "And that scares the hell out of me." The room didn't explode. No alarms went off. My heart just settled. "I'm already there," I admitted. "Have been for a while." He looked at me then, really looked, like he was memorizing the moment. "Okay," he said quietly. "Good." We didn't kiss. Didn't reach out. We just sat there, letting the truth exist without rushing it into something else. After that, everything felt sharper. Not heavier, clearer. The way his name sounded when I thought it. The way he gave me space without pulling away. We were careful, but not cautious. Intentional. A few days later, he squeezed my hand in the hallway, quick and subtle. My whole body hummed like I'd been plugged into something alive. That night, alone again, I thought about how love wasn't the dramatic rescue people expected. It was someone standing beside you, refusing to let the world misname what you were to each other. I didn't know where this was going. But for the first time, I trusted the direction, not because it was safe, but because it was honest. And that felt like a kind of freedom I'd been waiting for without realizing it. Telling people was harder than admitting it to ourselves. Not because anyone outright objected. Because everyone suddenly had opinions. Staff asked careful, overly professional questions about boundaries. Other residents smiled too brightly, like we were a feel-good brochure come to life. My parents noticed the way Jonah hovered close and asked if he was helping me adjust. No, I said, sharper than I meant to. He's my boyfriend. The word hung there, solid and real. My mom blinked. My dad nodded too quickly. No one argued, but no one celebrated either. It felt like claiming space in a room that hadn't been built for us. Jonah squeezed my hand afterward. You okay? I think so, I said. Just tired of translating. Yeah, he said. Me too. The first real fight happened over something stupid. I wanted to go downtown alone. No staff. No check-ins. Jonah thought it was risky, not because he didn't trust me, but because he knew how fast independence could get punished when it made people uncomfortable. They'll blame you if something goes wrong, he said. I know, I snapped. That doesn't mean I stopped living. We went quiet. Too quiet. He rolled away before I could stop him. That night, I replayed it all, the fear behind his words, the fear behind mine. By morning, I found him on the patio, staring at nothing. I'm not trying to cage you, he said before I could speak. I just don't want them using you as an excuse to take things away. I don't want you protecting me from myself, I said. I want you with me. He looked up then, eyes tired but honest. Okay. Then we figure it out together. We started making plans. Real ones. Not just appointments and therapy schedules, but futures. An apartment near a bus line. Adaptive furniture we picked out online like it was a shared fantasy. A city where no one knew us as a case study. Some nights we lay there, me in bed, him beside it, talking until the words thinned out. We didn't always touch. We didn't need to. The closeness was intentional, earned. One evening, as the lights dimmed automatically, Jonah said, You ever notice how people think love is about fixing? Yeah, I said. They miss the part where it's about choosing. He smiled, soft and sure. I choose you. I didn't answer right away. I just breathed it in, the steadiness, the weight of it, the way it didn't ask me to be anything other than present. Later, alone, I realized the fear hadn't gone away. It had just changed shape. It wasn't about whether I deserved this. It was about whether I was brave enough to keep choosing it back. I thought I was. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The night everything tilted wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No ultimatums. Just an envelope. I came back from occupational therapy to find Jonah sitting at my desk, shoulders tense, a manila envelope resting in his lap like it weighed more than paper should. He didn't look up right away. What's that? I asked. Opportunity, he said flatly. Apparently. He handed it to me. Inside was an acceptance letter, an independent living pilot program across the state. Subsidized housing. Personal aides on rotation. Full autonomy. For him. My chest tightened before I could stop it. That's huge. Yeah. He finally met my eyes. It is. I waited for the excitement to land. It didn't. Not cleanly. Something else threaded through it, fear, sharp and unwanted. When would you go? I asked. 6 weeks. The room felt smaller. I hated that my first thought wasn't pride. I hated that my second was distance. We didn't fight about it. That almost made it worse. We talked late into the night, circling the truth without stabbing it. He wanted this. He deserved this. I wasn't ready to pretend that wanting him close didn't matter. I'm not leaving you, he said quietly. I know, I said. You're just going somewhere I can't follow yet. That landed between us. Heavy and honest. I don't want to be the reason you stay, he said. I don't want to be the reason you go, I replied. He reached out then, resting his hand over mine, steady, grounding. This doesn't erase us. I know. My voice cracked anyway. The next few weeks blurred into logistics. Calls. Meetings. Staff acting proud in that distant, congratulatory way. People telling him how inspiring it was. Telling me how strong I was. No one asked how quiet the nights got. The goodbye wasn't permanent. That didn't make it easier. We sat on the patio the morning he left, sunlight stretching long across the concrete. His bags were already loaded into the transport van. You're going to be incredible, I said. You already think I am. He smiled. That's cheating. He leaned in, pressing his forehead briefly to mine. No audience. No performance. Just us. This isn't the end, he said. It's a hinge. I watched him roll away, not breaking down, not shattering, just breathing through the ache. Later, alone in my room, I let the silence settle. It hurt. But it wasn't hollow. It was shaped by choice. Love didn't mean staying the same distance forever. Sometimes it meant trusting that the space between you was temporary, and that what you built could stretch without breaking. I didn't know exactly when we closed that space again. But I knew we would. Long-distance love sounds romantic until you're living it in pieces. Jonah's new place was 3 hours away by train. The first time I visited, I spent the entire ride rehearsing how I'd act normal, how I wouldn't flinch at the quiet, how I wouldn't treat the space like a temporary set instead of his real life. He met me at the station, grinning like nothing had changed. Look at you, he said. Independent traveler. Don't get cocky. I shot back. I almost missed the transfer. His apartment was small but intentional. Furniture arranged with care. Adaptive controls mounted cleanly, not hidden. It felt lived in, not supervised. I like it, I said honestly. I hoped you would. That night, we ordered takeout and ate on the couch, knees close, shoulders brushing. We talked about nothing, shows, neighbors, the weird echo in the hallway. It was easy. Almost too easy. Then it wasn't. The hard part crept in quietly. I couldn't stay as long as I wanted. My own transition out of assisted living was still tangled in paperwork and waiting lists. When I left, Jonah didn't ask me to stay. That hurt more than if he had. Back home, the days stretched thin. We video called constantly, but screens flattened things. Touch didn't translate. Silence felt louder. One night, I snapped over something stupid, a missed call, a delayed reply. Jonah went quiet then said, I can't be your whole world. I know, I said, immediately ashamed. I just don't want to feel like an afterthought. You're not, he said. But we're building parallel lives right now. That's hard. He was right. That didn't make it easier. The breakthrough came from exhaustion, not clarity. I finally got approval for my own apartment, closer than Jonah's place, but still a start. The day I signed the lease, I called him with shaking hands. I did it, I said. I'm moving. He laughed, relief spilling through the line. I knew you would. When he visited a week later, we didn't rush anything. We unpacked boxes. Argued over where the coffee maker should go. Sat on the floor eating pizza because the table hadn't arrived yet. At some point, he reached for my hand and didn't let go. We're not synchronized, he said quietly. But we're moving in the same direction. I leaned into that truth. Let it settle. That night, after he left, I lay in my new bed listening to unfamiliar city sounds. It felt strange. Unfinished. But mine. Love hadn't solved everything. It hadn't erased the distance or the work still ahead. But it had survived change, and that felt like proof of something solid. I closed my eyes, breathing into the quiet, knowing the next step wouldn't be perfect. Just chosen. The first night Jonah stayed over, either of us slept much. Not because we were nervous, because we were listening. To the new sounds of the building. To each other's breathing. To the quiet proof that we'd made it this far without breaking. In the morning, sunlight spilled across the floor, catching on half-unpacked boxes and the cheap curtains I hadn't replaced yet. Jonah was awake before me, positioned near the window, watching the city like it might explain itself if he stared long enough. "You okay?" I asked. He smiled without turning. "Yeah. Just realizing this feels real. It's been real." "I know," he said. "This just caught up." The months that followed weren't easy. They weren't supposed to be. There were accessibility issues no brochure warned me about. Days when my body refused cooperation. Days when his did too. We argued about money, about energy, about when asking for help felt like surrender instead of strategy. But something had changed. We didn't argue like people afraid of losing each other. We argued like people invested in staying. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating appointment, I snapped at him for hovering. He snapped back for shutting him out. The silence afterwards stretched thin and sharp. Then he said, "I don't need you to be invincible. I don't need you to be my armor." I replied. We sat with that. Let it breathe. Found the middle. The day we signed the lease for a place closer to the city center, a place chosen by both of us, felt quieter than I expected. No fireworks. No speeches. Just us, side by side, pens in hand. Later, we celebrated with bad takeout on the floor, backs against the wall, knees touching. Jonah rested his head against my shoulder, a simple weight that still felt like a privilege. "You know," he said, "people are going to keep misunderstanding us." "I know. They'll still stare. Still assume. Still try to translate us into something easier." I thought about that. About all the versions of myself I'd been asked to perform. About how much effort it took to unlearn apologizing for existing. "Let them," I said finally. "We're not here to be easy." He laughed softly. "Good. Because I've never been low maintenance." As the evening settled, the city hummed around us, imperfect, loud, alive. I realized then that the story people expected from us was never the point. There was no overcoming, no inspirational arc tied up with a bow. Just two men choosing each other. Again and again. With honesty. With room to grow. I didn't feel rescued. Or completed. I felt accompanied. And for the first time in my life, that felt like home.